I've been an innocent bystander watching what was going on in the SEC, certainly with Alabama, Texas A&M. And then we noticed that they were going to have their meetings. This isn't media day. These are just meetings down in Florida. Might as well be media day. And we thought we should have on Mike Rodak. Mike he covered the NFL, so he covered Belichick with the Patriots, and he also covered the Buffalo Bills for ESPN. Now he's covering Alabama sports for AL.com, and he joins us now. Mike, what's the difference between Belichick and Saban?
There's a big difference. I don't think you get very much out of Belichick. I think for Saban, you're going to get a lot. I think if you ask a question the wrong way, he's going to jump on you. I think if you, ask a question in a way that sort of gets him going, he's going to get going. With Belichick, it's just sort of gruff and not a whole lot happening. But Saban's going to tell you something. He's just going to, there's going to be a whole lot of theater with it.
I'm wondering if you could feel it, if it's tangible, that the SEC Commissioner, Greg Sankey, kind of put the kibosh on comments here, encouraged coaches. Lane Kiffin wasn't allowed to come on our show. Is there a feeling at these meetings that these coaches, everybody's playing nice and nobody's going to say anything inflammatory?
There is. I don't think there was an official decree that they can't talk about, the issue between Nick and Jimbo. And I think they have talked about it to some extent, but I think there is sort of a message sent that, whether it was explicit or not from Greg Sankey, that they needed to sort of tone it down and make sure that there was still some level of professionalism, as Lane Kiffin described it. Essentially, he put it, you text somebody, you might say a little bit more in the text than you're willing to say in person. So in this case, they both said a little bit more when they were alone in their own cities and on camera in both cases. But when they actually saw each other in the same room, in Lane's opinion, they weren't willing to say quite as much. And that was really what Sankey wanted. He wanted a meeting that was focused more on the issues than sort of the back and forth and the drama that's happened.
But Saban and Fisher are in the same meeting rooms?
They are. So it's just the head coaches, the 14 head coaches in the SEC. There's a seating chart that got out yesterday where Jimbo's actually seated with all the SEC officials and Greg Sankey and Herb Vincent and all those guys. And the initial opinion of that was, okay, they wanted Jimbo to be separate. But in reality, it's just he's the chairman of that group. It rotates on a yearly basis. And there wasn't as big of a story there as it might have seemed yesterday.
All right, let's go back a couple of weeks ago. How did this get out of hand, considering what Saban was saying and who he was saying it to? Private event. And a lot of times these coaches don't realize that this does go viral eventually. You might be talking, it's a home court advantage. And then all of a sudden Fisher gets wind of this. How would you describe that to somebody who's still trying to understand exactly what happened?
Right. So I was actually there that night in Birmingham, and it was a case of they only thought that the media was going to be there for 15 minutes. That was the initial ruling that was given to us. And that was, I think, Nick Saban's understanding, which was why that question about NIL to this room was put at the end of the speech, thinking that the media would be gone by then. And it wouldn't be recorded on camera. It wouldn't be a story. Nobody ever kicked us out. And so I was there. There was other reporters there. There were TV cameras there. We were 20 feet away from the stage. Like, if he didn't see 4 TV cameras 20 feet away from him, I doubt that he missed us, but I don't think he thought it was going to get out the way it did. I don't think there was some grand plan here on Nick Saban's part to make this a story. But I think once it became a story that Nick Saban saying Texas A&M's buying his players, it did work into his whole argument about NIL that he wants to get into the national discussion, which is the original purpose of NIL for players to make money off marketing deals has been lost, in that now there are collectives and groups of boosters who come together and buy the rights to these players. And it essentially becomes pay for play, where recruits are being paid to come to schools. And that is his overall point. I don't think it was part of some grand plan. And I think he almost looks better the more that Jimbo talks, and the more that Jimbo seems like the more emotionally charged guy, where Nick Saban seems a little bit more grounded right now.
Yeah. Saban he didn't realize he was making it personal by saying that they bought all the players. Bought is the key word. If he just said, look, they took advantage of a window here, a loophole. We need to do the same thing. And it felt like he was saying to these businessmen, hey, we got to pony up. We want to be the number one recruiting class. Well, if you're Jimbo, and he's already sensitive about the recruits they get, that you're buying players, then he goes scorched earth on Saban, the person, and stuff going on behind the scenes. And I thought that, I thought Jimbo Fisher looked worse out of this because I don't think Saban meant what it sounded like. But Jimbo Fisher, you can't, you know that he meant what he meant when he said that about Nick Saban.
Exactly right. It's a battle of semantics a little bit because the way that Nick Saban worded it, that Texas A&M bought their players, does accuse them of directly paying their players, which is not really what he was trying to say. He was trying to say that there's collectives of boosters that on the side pay these players, which is legal. The way that the rules and the laws are written right now, that's perfectly fine. And that's been Nick Saban's point, is that he's not accusing them of doing something wrong. He's more accusing them of doing something that would violate the spirit of the rules and the spirit of what NIL is. But when Jimbo Fisher comes out and says, there was an interview he did separately with the San Antonio TV station where they asked him, why are you so good at NIL? And he says, we're not. I don't know if anybody truly believes him on that. And I think the whole argument that we don't know what NIL, we don't know what collectives are, I don't know if anybody's truly buying that. And just to claim ignorance, I agree, it does make him look worse in this situation.
Okay, I give you 2 questions for Jimbo Fisher. He has to answer. What do you ask?
Well, I think, first of all, he threw out a lot of accusations about Nick Saban and what his former assistants might know. And we've asked a few of them, Billy Napier from Florida and Kirby Smart, and they sort of dodged the question. They didn't say it one way or the other. But I think Jimbo Fisher needs to sort of move forward with that accusation or either pull it back. He's kind of stuck in the middle right now where he's made very vague accusations but hasn't really put any meat on them. So that's one of the questions. And number 2, I think it's just the idea of, are you truly claiming that these collectives don't exist, or you don't know about these collectives? You have no knowledge of that. I think, again, nobody believes that. And I think at some point there needs to be an acknowledgement that these things do exist. And yes, they are legal underneath the current framework. And that's fine. I think if you're Texas A&M, you want to signal to the rest of college football that you pay well and that you're doing these things right. I don't think there's anything wrong with that in the current day and age.
But do you see where I don't even know if the NCAA can do this, but let's say the SEC. Does Greg Sankey say to those coaches or administrators, this is what we need to do, that we have to have guidelines with name, image, and likeness? Would Sankey approach that?
I think they can try, but ultimately, and this is why Greg Sankey went to Capitol Hill, it needs to be something on a bigger scale than just the SEC. The SEC can't really make a rule themselves that would carry water legally, which is the biggest problem. That's that there's antitrust laws on a federal level that led to these lawsuits, that led to the Supreme Court ruling, that if they try to make these rules that are more restrictive and creates some sort of guardrails, as everybody likes to say about NIL, they're opening themselves up to a lawsuit. And there's very rich, powerful people with very rich, powerful lawyers who will sue the NCAA or the SEC or whoever it is. And so it needs to be done on a federal level. And that's been Nick Saban's message. That's been Greg Sankey's message. And I don't know if there's anything that they can walk out of this week with any new sort of NIL rules or legislation to fix this.
What's the end game here for the SEC?
Well, I think long term, if you're talking 5, 10, 15 years down the road, I think it's a professional league, essentially, where you have contracts. And there has been talk about that this week, where coaches want transparency. They want contracts. They want an agreement like there is in professional sports in the NFL. And essentially, where players are not just paid for NIL and their name, image, and likeness, they're paid salaried. And it's more out in the open. It's more transparent. As you can look up anybody's contract in the NFL. I think coaches want to be able to look up and see what players are making across college football. And I think that's ultimately where the league will go, is where players are paid and it becomes more of a pro league that players have the option to go to school, essentially, which is what it's been all along, but it's more authentic to what actually college football is right now.
Great stuff, Mike. Good to check in with you, and I hope you're having fun down there.
Yeah, it's in the basement of a hotel. I think there's a rumor that there's a beach out there somewhere, so I'll have to look into it.
Thank you, Mike.
You got it. Thank you.
That's Mike Rodak. He is covering Alabama for AL.com, the Alabama media group there.